The Cosme colony collection is formed of two parts. The first part, this part here, was acquired from the Sydney journalist and author Gavin Souter, who wrote a book about the Paraguay colonies called A Peculiar People. And that part of the collection contains his research notes, the manuscripts of the book, photographs and so on. The second part of the collection was acquired from descendants of John Lane, who was one of the original colonists. And we have a photo of John Lane here. And this part of the collection contains photos, printed material, documents and letters from the Lane family. The first settlement that was established in Paraguay was called New Australia. And here in the collection we have a certificate of membership, and this particular certificate belonged to John Lane, who was the younger brother of William Lane, the founder of the New Australia Cooperative Settlement Association. Right from the start, despite the ideals of brotherhood and equality that they had in the colony, there was dissension and unhappiness. There were quarrels and rumours, and two groups formed fairly quickly. One group which followed William Lane and his rules of teetotalism and not mixing with the Paraguayans, and another group which were opposed to Lane's rules and who found the conditions overly harsh and the rewards few. Here we have some photographs from the New Australia colony. Here we have the Lane family, John Lane, whose certificate of membership we have here. Sitting in front of him is Cosme Lane, one of his daughters, who was the first child born at Cosme colony. And one of my favourite photos from the collection is a photo of Jenny Lane, John Lane's wife, and one of his daughters in their kitchen. Jenny Lane is cooking, and you can see oranges on the table, and the daughter, who I think may be Alice, looks like she's making a cup of tea. I think this particular photo is quite unusual because normally when you see photos from this period, they're quite formal photos, and this one's very informal. It's people doing something in their own setting. And we know that the settlers, when they first arrived, relied on the orange trees which grew wild in the area. They relied on them to supplement their diet. And here in this photo you can just see some oranges, and it looks like Jenny Lane may be cooking an orange cake for afternoon tea. And here we have an original document from New Australia. It's a report of the education system to be adopted by New Australia. It's very detailed, very well thought out, but unfortunately the reality didn't live up to these ideals. A number of teachers came and went, and it was really quite haphazard. A second batch of colonists arrived at New Australia in 1894 in March, but conditions only became worse. People mistrusted William Lane and the way that he was running the colony. And finally, William Lane resigned his position as chairman and left with 63 of his followers to form a new colony. They acquired some land about 72 kilometres southeast of New Australia, and this land was bought with money that was sent to Dave Stevenson, one of the colonists, who was a cousin of Robert Louis Stevenson, the author. And Dave's well-to-do family in Scotland sent him £150, and that money was used to buy 9,300 hectares, which then became the second colony, Cosme colony, or Colonia Cosme in Spanish. And here we have some of the material from the Lane section of the Cosme colony collection. We've got a wonderful collection of photos here, and for example we've got one of the houses that was built at Cosme Colony, and you'll notice that it's very typical of an Australian timber slab house. We've got photographs of the men of the colony. We've got Dave Stevenson, who inherited the 150 pounds reclining down the front here. He was quite a dapper fellow. We've got some of the children in the orange grove. We've got a lovely photo here, a very faint one, of the colonists playing cricket, great Australian pastime, transposed to Paraguay. We've also got a photo here of the children of the colony at school, getting ready for a presentation. And here we have a photo of one of the most well-known of the colonists, Mary Gilmore, later to become Dame Mary Gilmore, the Australian poet and national icon. She went to Cosme Colony as Mary Cameron. She followed Dave Stevenson, but she ended up marrying William Gilmore, pictured here. As well, we have documents that came from the colony. One of the ones I like the most is this little piece of paper here, which is a record of the colonists with their names, their age, weight, height, measurements, where they came from and their occupation. And I feel this little document really brings the story of the colony to life. We've also got an official document from the Paraguayan government. It's a document in Spanish appointing John Lane as an immigration agent. And here we have some of the publications of the colony. We have a price list of goods supplied and work done at Cosme. This would have been printed at the colony. And we've also got a general information leaflet. This probably would have been sent out to Australia and England in the hope of attracting new recruits. Cosme eventually failed as well. There was rancour and division amongst the colonists. People left in a steady stream and not enough new recruits came to replace them. Despite the hard work of the colonists, the crops failed, and because of the isolation of the colony, it meant that there was no ready market for what they were growing. Eventually, in 1899, William Lane, the founder, was so disillusioned he left the colony. He left Paraguay and he went to New Zealand, where he worked as a journalist and later editor on the New Zealand Herald. According to the publication, the Cosme Monthly News, he left for health reasons, but also because he wanted to be free to propagandise. We also have an interesting little handwritten receipt, which is a receipt for trial membership for a man called Leonard Apthorpe, who came to Cosme Colony from England in 1900 as a result of William Lane's recruiting drive there. And we have a photo of Len Apthorpe here. He's the man in the photo wearing the cap, holding the child. He ended up being one of the long-term colonists, but he was often criticised by the other colonists because he was considered lazy. The collection also has a number of artefacts in it. First of all, we have this board, which was carved by this man here, John or Jack Parrish. He was a woodcarver who came from Bradford in England. He arrived in Cosme Colony in 1900 after William Lane's recruiting trip there. And this board is nicely symbolic of the ideals of Cosme Colony. We have some corn here, which was grown at the colony, another type of plant over here. We have the horn of plenty. It seems to symbolise the idealism and the optimism with which the colony was begun, but sadly, unfortunately, none of that survived and the colony disintegrated. We also have a baton made out of the local timber, lapacho. Here we have a notebook that originally belonged to John Parrish. He left the colony eventually to return to England, and the notebook was passed on to John Lane. John Lane took this notebook to Australia when he went back for a recruiting trip in 1901, and it really was an extraordinary trip that he made. He sailed to Perth and then travelled to Adelaide. In Adelaide he bought himself a bicycle, and he rode his bicycle from Adelaide through the outback and the desert to Broken Hill, White Cliffs and Burke in western New South Wales, and then on up to Glen Innes in northern New South Wales. He did it in the height of summer. He rode a distance of over 1,700 kilometres on the bike. And in this little notebook we have a record of that trip. So we have a list of his expenses, and here we have a record of his purchase of the bike. We have lists of the towns that he visited and the public lectures that he gave, contacts that he made, people who were interested in possibly moving to Cosme colony. On that particular trip, John Lane took a number of glass slides with him, and we have some of them here. He carried these slides with him so that he could show them on a magic lantern at public lectures. And we've reproduced these images. And here's one of them. This is a group of the Cosme colonists reading the Cosme evening notes. Every night they gathered together, and the notes of what had happened during the day were read aloud to the group. Later on, the Cosme evening notes were replaced by the Cosme Monthly, a more formal printed newsletter. It began being handwritten and was later printed at the colony. One of the very early issues from January 1895 has a map of Cosme on the front. And just reading the last two paragraphs on the back page gives you a sense of what it was like living at the colony at the time. No particular sickness. Mrs. Lawrence getting well in Villarica and returning soon. Another baby, first boy born in Cosme. Cash and food both short, beginning of month. Nearly reached bedrock. Got 1,500 pounds of beans on credit. 8 beans till corn grew. Pretty short of various little necessaries still, but have loads of tucker now. Consider this fairly good for 6 months on virgin land.